Hey nerd! Today we will be finishing off our latest Proto MG tutorial, aka the PMG3, with the final part in the series. Now this is technically optional, but can be very useful when it comes to customizing your mech. This is not a strict guideline you have to follow, but just some pretty big tips that you can apply even when building any sort of mech, regardless of whether it's a tutorial or a mech of your own design. So, the first thing that you want to do when starting yourself a new and original mech is to develop an overarching theme or concept for the mech, or really any build in particular, since nearly all builds have themes in their own right. For example, here we have some Roman mechs, samurai mechs, knight mechs, and military mechs. Some mechs actually might even have 4 arms, which just goes to show how creative you can be with this template. And there are definitely more ideas out there that we can't even cover. But we can't stress enough just how relevant having a grip on what your build should look like is. Otherwise, it may look a little bit funny, kind of like these. Anyways, though we want these mechs to all have unique and interesting designs, we didn't start this tutorial to have a bunch of retools and recolors of the exact same mech. Looking at you, Neo Proto MG. Moving on, if you want to pick a proper theme, you're gonna have to use what you have, which is look on the internet. What we recommend to do is to look at some things that you already like. For example, we already have some mechs inspired by anime, military technology, and even versions of our own custom mechs beyond the template. To be honest, you could even recreate a famous mech that already exists using the template, such as a Gundam, Jaeger, or even Transformer. Remember, you should feel free to draw inspiration, but make sure that you are original as well. Seeing the same mechs being remade constantly because too many people like each other's builds will be a little bit saddening. Now that we've discussed making each mech distinctive, we can now go over another important factor, the color. Once again, you can use the internet to find references for color, or even have them automatically generated for you. Now, the most important rule I will tell you guys for color is to never, ever use the default colors from the paint tool. Always create your own using the sliders. Another common problem is having your colors be too bright or saturated. Prevent this by lowering the saturation slider on your paint tool. The saturation slider should almost never be above 90. Something we also see with this is that some people seem to only choose 2 colors to divide amongst their mech. So something like this, with the colors repeating over and over, red and black, red and black, red and black, you see the issue, right? The colors are not very well mapped, and with just 2 colors, it is quite difficult to make the color mapping look very nice, even though we did the same for ourselves for the template. But, once again, it is the template to build off of, but not keep. With many people seeming just to place rods on their mech and recolor them, our solution here is to basically teach you guys basic mech color theory. So, you might have noticed that we also left many exposed 2x2 cubes of the inner frame. These are what we refer to as hardpoints. These hardpoints are located at the sides and back of the legs, back of the torso, shoulders, and forearms, and serves as a point where you can mount anything your heart desires. These can be things such as weapons, thrusters, armor, or even additional limbs. Obviously, under the freedom of Build-A-Boat, you can mount things outside of the hardpoints, but they are merely there to give you a rough outline of where you can add more parts to your mech to truly make it your own unique custom build. After you have the basic idea for a mech, you can either start altering the template armor and frame, or begin creating some new custom armor. One thing to note when creating custom armor is to be careful and not accidentally fill in some of the hard to spot joint gaps. Otherwise, your mech will not be able to move. Moreover, with building armor, something creative you could also do is use the built-in hardpoints to add more jointed armor, such as knee guards, ankle guards, or skirt armor. A lot can be done with building a new unique armor other than just the base template mech, so take this part of building slower.
But what good is a mech that can't fight?
This is where I come in. As a self-proclaimed mech gang weapons expert, I can tell you the rest. So to start with, the weapons are a quite important component of your mech, and will help it stand out from the rest, as well as making it much cooler when you obliterate your friends in a competition, instead of just, I don't know, slapping each other with dynamite.
Check this out. Boom.
No!
You have no sword anymore. No!
Got destroyed by his own weapon. Something quick to warn you guys with weapons is that this can tend to be the laggiest part of your mechs, especially with adding too many spike blocks. which usually causes your ping to spike
and rise at a constant rate. Do not underestimate this though. The lag can get to absolutely absurd levels.
A general way that we've been avoiding these issues these days is by spreading spike blocks very far apart, and being especially conservative in just the amount alone. I'd personally recommend that your spike count, at the absolute most, say under 400.
Generally, a lot of people, and even the game, are going to suffer from lag if you don't do this. Don't do this. So you have to take this seriously.
First of all, you may have noticed your mech not being able to move very well. A good idea is to add a large collision-off weight brick underneath, and by that I mean very large, usually counting in tens of thousands of blocks. And what this does is to allow your cake glitch to have more control over the mech. This way, you'll also immediately notice that your mech is able to stand up straight and turn pretty much instantly. And another feature to possibly help is to just add decently large invisible bricks onto the feet, simply making them larger. Secondly, I know it may be easy to just make a quick sword with spike traps and explosives, but you should just go beyond the simple and basic sword shape. Try making it more stylized, with a different shape or inspiration, such as rapiers or katanas or the scimitar. Some other interesting and notable examples of melee weaponry include pickaxes, saw blades, lances, drills, pile bunkers, polearms, hammers, tridents, and scythes. Maybe you could also make a mech wield a giant flagpole which represents their nation, or even an ogre-themed mech, using a tree. Another type of weapon you should consider is some form of ranged weaponry, in cases where engaging in close combat is far too dangerous. Now, the most common forms of these are the missile and the laser, but once again, try to go beyond just those basic weapons and make a very cool housing for them. Someone might make a missile launcher, like on ships, or simply a gun-shaped launcher, or possibly deploy their attacks using magic or sci-fi rings. Some interesting concepts for extra ranged weaponry are a bow, missile fist, laser eyes, throwing knives, giant sword launchers, giant shark launchers, and then the good old-fashioned firearm. You can mount these ranged weapons in the typical handheld manner, but can also use the pre-arranged hardpoints as additional areas to place your ranged weaponry, such like how the gun cannon and other similar mobile suits in Mobile Suit Gundam have shoulder-mounted cannons, or like an armored core with missiles, cannons, and other things mounted onto their backs. Now we can move on to some tips on how to make your weapon functional. Something I could mention is that earlier we saw MG mechs using two-handed weapons, like the huge katana-looking weapon, the Nodachi, and the greatsword called the Zweihander. This is done by adding additional joints onto the arms, specifically some high-mobility wrist joints. This allows the hands to have an even better position and grip onto the handles. But the specific way is by adding on pistons to the hands that pull the hand onto the sword. Now this isn't exactly a better way to attach, but it does allow minimal changes to the frame. Now, onto making your weapons actually work! The most common block to use on melee weapons specifically is the spike blocks. But again, with spikes, you want to be conservative on how you place it, and not spam them right next to each other. And one suggestion is to place spikes floating around the weapon instead of spamming them right on the surface of the weapon. One tip that we have in general with missiles and weapons is to place dynamite outside of the actual missile, with invisible dynamite spreading over the intended area of effect. This can actually lead to really insane damage, such as this.
The missile teleported underground?
No!
No! I wish for a dream.
Wait, another one just teleported back.
What?
No. Something else with projectiles is that we tend to make most of it to be collision off, and instead opt to having a thick backplate and thin rods that are capable of actually piercing and getting stuck into mechs, which punches through the surface and kills them from the inside. An important thing to keep in mind for this design is that the missile has to be very heavy. It's possible you may want thousands of blocks behind the attack. Another deadly idea is to construct a small amount of spike traps within your already lethal projectile. This allows it to act as a shrapnel weapon upon getting stuck and detonating within your target. The other ranged weapon some of you may be thinking of are lasers, which a lot of people have already tried to replace with Gatling guns. But this is slightly misguided because they have very diminished damage in comparison to the classic dynamite beam of old days. An additional type of weapon that often is forgot is defensive weaponry. This is usually found in the forms of shields, but can also be through extra armor on your mech. You can mount your shields to the side of the arms on the pre-made hardpoints like you usually would, but they can also be floating around the mech as well, using some sort of sci-fi magic or maybe robotic extra arms. Something final to say with defenses is that you may notice spike blocks easily penetrating your dynamite defenses and killing you. A method we've devised to counter the development of buildable weapons is to create a sort of passively reacting armor in the form of using more spike blocks. This has the effect of nullifying the enemy attack and in many cases damaging or disabling their weapons. This also can still backfire, as spikes will instantly detonate dynamite, allowing a well-placed group of dynamite to instantly kill you. But still, it's a very effective way at protecting your mech, especially those very weak hinge blocks.
Okay guys, and with that we come to an end to our Proto MG3 tutorial. Hopefully with these tools and tips, you too can begin creating amazing mechs. Remember to create your own colors, don't make the colors too saturated, add lots of personal flair, and feel free to remove sections of the mech and add new parts to it. I look forward to seeing your guys' mechs, and if you enjoyed the video, remember to like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
So guys, I know this video took so long, but we're never making a video again!